Hello, welcome. My name is Ryan Palmer. I am the VP of Clinical Education at AM Opportunities, and I am here today with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Kevin Klauer, who is our Senior Strategic Advisor at AMO. That's what we'll call it from now on. And I'm so excited you're here because, one, you're one of my favorite people to talk to. You're my favorite Senior Strategic Advisor to talk to because right now you're our only one. But if there were more, you'd still be my favorite. But really, on a serious note, I'm excited because we share a passion, and that's education. When I first met you, and we'll talk about your background in a second, I could just tell, first and foremost, you're an innovative thinker, but then you're also at heart an educator. And I'm an educator, and it's just, I was so excited when you came on board with us because you really bring so much to this organization in this space we're in now, in this U.S. domestic space, in addition to our international space. So I wanted to kind of start this off by, we're going to talk today about clinical education, and that's a big topic. But really, I'd love, because of our respective backgrounds, and especially your background, we'll talk about two sides of that equation. One is the clinical side, the hospitals and the clinics and the teachers, right? And why they would need clinical students to rotate with them, and what it does for them, and how they keep the pipeline going. And then also the school side. So what are the challenges and opportunities on the school side? And I think because of our backgrounds, we're hopefully going to be able to talk with some level of authority on it. At least you will. But because I've been talking about that, I will give a quick little background for me, which I think you know, but people listening to this might not. I have about 15 plus years in academic medicine, so much less on the clinical side. But I spent most of my time at Oregon Health and Science University. I worked and learned how to put together a curriculum with working with docs at the dean's office, and then I got a doctorate in education, went on faculty in family medicine, and really my passion was really born there when I was working in rural medical education and also in primary care. And really, with rural medical education, I realized the power of clinical placements for students, but then great learning, but then also for clinical sites that struggle with workforce. One of the best ways you could think of to build your workforce pipeline is to host students. And I can't tell you how many students I saw over the years who are from an urban area in California who are now practicing in Madras, Oregon, or Gold Beach, Oregon, because they went there on a rotation. They loved it. I worked as an assistant dean at American University of the Caribbean for a bit, and then I was most recently the Associate Dean of Med Ed at Northeast Ohio Medical University, which is a community-based medical school which functions in many ways like a doctor of osteopathy or DO school, which is we're going to talk a lot about today. So that's my background, but really I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background as we go into this conversation, and then we can kind of just talk.
Well, Ryan, I appreciate it, and thanks for the kind words, and I am so thankful for the opportunity to be an advisor of any kind with AMO, and please call me Kevin because we are friends and colleagues, and I love your background and what you bring to the offerings of AMO, and I'm thankful that maybe some of my background is helping to guide the organization a bit. Really, if for no other reason, to let people know what the great offerings are, because I think some people still look at it as a bit of a black box and not understanding what can be provided.
Yep.
And so my interest, of course, have been in academics in the past, but I'm now currently involved with a significantly sized GME program through HCA and in Florida, and formerly was the CEO of the American Osteopathic Association, and we did, as you know, all the accreditation for the colleges of osteopathic medicine. That was such a wonderful opportunity for me working in that role, but also took that charge very seriously to uphold the standards the set by COCA, and to make sure that we were providing the best quality education through those wonderful colleges of osteopathic medicine. But they've got to have the resources, and they shouldn't have to work too hard to get them.
Right.
That's what I found AMO is all about.
Great. Well, thank you for that background. And it's, again, we're bonded on that because one of the first things I thought of when I looked at this organization, I said, wow, among other organizations, DO schools could really benefit of this because of that distributed learning model, whereas there's not that baked in, often hospital that's there to take 75 to 80% of the students like they did at OHSU when I was there. rather DO schools, much like a community-based medical school or a physician assistant school or even many nursing schools, have to look outside to find those rotations. So really, we'll talk about some of these challenges they face in doing that, and also how we could really connect them to clinical sites to help the clinical sites with the big challenge they have, which is workforce. So let's go back to that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, in your many experiences, what you think are the key issues and challenges that, let's focus on the schools, healthcare schools typically face in their clinical programming.
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I knew you were going to ask, so I'm prepared to answer that question.
How'd you know?
But we had this conversation when we first met, so
Right.
that wasn't rehearsed, and this really isn't either.
Right.
Because it's so obvious. Right now, particularly if you aren't in an ivory tower and you don't have your medical school located at a hospital facility, you don't have ready-made rotations.
Right.
So the first 2 years of didactics, well, they're on site, and that's a great opportunity for you to show what you can provide from a didactic standpoint. But what do you do when you send students out for your clinical rotations and don't have a place to go?
Right.
That's a problem. Tuition's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Expectation of the student is the same, maybe even higher, because they're getting closer to the end of their graduation and need to apply those clinical sciences to actual real-world experience. How are they going to do that? And to be an individual medical school and find those relationships is just really difficult. So it's a challenge. You want quantity. You need to have a lot to pick from. You need quality. You've got to have great partners to make sure you're providing the quality of education that you told your students you would.
Yeah.
And you don't want it to be overly burdensome.
Right.
And to do all this work, and I've seen this before, a school will work really, really hard to create an opportunity with even one hospital or hospital system that's local for them. For what to happen? For others to start to use those rotation blocks, and they weren't even involved in the relationship. And it gets very frustrating for schools.
Right.
So if you have a larger pool of rotations to choose from, then it's a lot easier to do for your students, and you can be much more successful.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, I'm glad you brought that up. When I was at Neomed, we actually had a situation where we had an established site. We had about 6 students there in their family medicine rotations, and overnight, a hospital system from Boston bought it and kicked everybody out. And it was literally the dean of the medical school, the vice dean, myself, and a wonderful woman who'd worked there for over 60 years and knew everybody in the area, working for 4 days to try to find placements for those students, because you think it's easy to get these rotations, but even these schools with these long-standing rotations, they're usually almost at 100% capacity max. They don't have a surplus. And so when those things happen, it's not like they can just go off the shelf and pull things and say, we'll put them there. It's really, really difficult. So to your point, you really do have to have that diversity of sites. And many schools it's not anything wrong with the schools. They just don't have the bandwidth to do that.
No, you don't. And the competition, Ryan, is significant.
Yeah.
So when you realize that there are allied health programs out there, wonderful programs, we need team-based care.
Right.
But when there's a lot of competition for these rotation sites, an individual school is going to have to spend a lot of time and energy and maybe even more money than they should to secure them.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about this too, and I've just got to leap into this for a second, because this was where I think a lot of people's skepticism has gone, and where my initial questions were about AMO. Okay, it sounds like a great service. Well, it's got to cost you a lot to get great service. This is one of the few things that I have seen in organized medicine and experienced through learning from you and others, that you're just spending the same dollars at a medical school or allied health profession school than you were going to spend already.
Right.
You don't spend that money on the relationship with AMO.
Right.
You just get access to those rotations, and you spend the money you were already going to spend to secure those rotations.
Right.
And I think people think, well, it's got to be expensive. It's a lot of service. It's a lot of resource. That's not how you're funded. That's not the way it works. So it makes it really, really easy to say yes and to partner with AMO, knowing that it's only making your service better.
Right. And thank you for saying that, because I think the same thing. I mean, we have schools that we work with that, most schools have in-house capacity, and they don't partner with us because they don't have that. They partner with us because they want to expand that for issues like I talked about, if there's an emergency, or if they're expanding their class size, or just to give their students better options. Right. Because as many in the DO world, there's some schools before that where the students are literally, they have to go find their rotations. They're given a list, and they say, good luck to you. But they're charged the same amount of tuition for that, and regardless of if they're getting more help or not. So what's worked really well when we've partnered with our DO schools is we kind of solve a couple problems. First of all, for the school, we solve that problem of expanding their options. So if there are those issues, they have more things to pick from, more sites, because we have those sites, we have those relationships. They can look at them. There's no cost for them to look at them, but if they, to your point, if they want to work with us, then those are available. But when you think about it, the amount of money they're already spending is not much different, and those students are getting a heck of a lot better experience, not than the ones that they get through their own internal organization. This is not a better proposition than the school. But when you think about those students who would have had to go and get those themselves, that's a lot better, because what we do is they have a coach that's assigned to them instantly. Once they say that's it and the school approves the rotation, they have a coach. Mm-hmm. They have somebody on the other side working with the site. There's somebody with that student 100% of the time. Whereas before, imagine that if you're walking around trying to find it. So the students find it less stressful too. So
sure, and you've digitized the offering. I mean, they can go and shop.
Right.
I want to do an elective in X, Y, or Z.
Right.
Well, maybe they can find one in the area. Maybe the school can help them find one. Are they going to help every single student find a particular area of interest? Well, they can, and I'm sure they would have asked, but what if you provided the resource so they could go and look themselves?
Right.
And I think today's learner wants that flexibility and wants that autonomy to do it themselves. It's not like you're abdicating your responsibility as a teacher, an educator. You're saying, here's the resource. You can look at anything you like, and we've created a relationship with AMO, who has created a relationship with their hard work with all these clinical sites.
Right.
And therefore, you have access to it.
Yep.
Works out well for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you always look for those things that are win-wins. And it's funny because sometimes I'm talking to places and they're like, what's the catch? I'm like, there's no catch. It's really it. It's just what it is this is a niche area. I mean, tell me what you think of this. The reason I was attracted to come to this organization, and why I think you are too, is we understand there's fundamental asymmetry in the most important quality for any, I think, clinical training, and that is that apprenticeship model where you go and you work with the clinician and you learn from them, and you get, that to me was always where I saw the magic happen with medical students when I worked with them, was that third year. And so, but schools go to where they go, they have relationships they have, but they usually don't have a big infrastructure to go out and get more of it, because it's just not how they do it, right? And then on the flip side, the clinical sites are often have those existing relationships, and say they said, well, we really need more students for workforce. How do they go out and get that? Right? They don't really have a big. You run a clinical system. You know how that. You have GME people. You have people who are medical education focused, but that outward reaching just often isn't there. So I think AMO serves. It's a niche that we're in. So when I say this doesn't make this too good to be true, it's because we found something that there needs to be symmetry in this asymmetry, and that's what AMO kind of gets into.
And if you scale it nationally, even internationally, which is interesting where you started, there's enough work to be done for this to make sense. Mm-hmm. At every institution, there's almost not enough work to make it a primary focus.
Right.
People are working on it. They are, and they're good at it, but they're limited in the amount of time they can spend because it's not their primary job. Right. It's not a full-time endeavor. So this can make it so much better. And I tell you what, reflecting on your former point, I've seen some of the most outstanding undergraduate medical education in colleges of osteopathic medicine and MD schools as well. And the limiting factor, as you stated, get to year 3 and 4. If you can't get good clinical rotations to support the wonderful didactics that you've already gotten, it all falls apart from there.
It does.
So making this easy and not resisting the path of least resistance is really a great idea.
Right. And to your point, when you look at it too, we have this huge healthcare workforce shortage in our country. It's a fact. You can any profession now, medical doctor, nurse, physician assistant, whatever you look at, there's a shortage.
Right.
And the rate limiting factor on getting more of these people out there is not people who want to go into it. There's a lot of people who want to go into it. The schools are, they're opening up their doors as fast as they can. It's those clinicals. Right. Because you have to have clinical rotations of quality to go on to become a clinician of whatever type you're going to be. And so, to me, you have to have the I always go back to asymmetry. There needs to be more symmetry. There needs to be more solutions to help streamline that process. Right. Because the schools can only do so much. And the clinical sites can only do so much.
Well, think about the amplification within the pandemic.
Right.
Okay, nobody was having clinical rotations.
Right.
But when they started to open up, they were at a premium.
Right.
Nobody could get clinical rotations, and some people had to extend their medical school experience to wait to get the experience they needed to, while others were able to meet the graduation requirements and perhaps maybe didn't feel as comfortable as their predecessors entering into their postgraduate training and residency.
Right.
So making sure that there's ample opportunity out there and creating space for people is a really, really important thing. It's not just choice, it's capacity, as you said.
Right. And I think there's this illusion, too, that there's a scarcity of these rotations or people who want to take on learners. And I don't believe that. I think there's a scarcity of certain types of clinical rotations.
Right.
If you go to an academic medical center, you had everybody in there. You got, I always tell the students, you want to go into the community for many different reasons, but one is you're not 3 residents deep back. You're actually hands-on. You go to a rural area, you're doing this stuff. Any place that there's a clinician, there's a teacher, I think. I've always believed that because, I'm speaking to your profession, but you wouldn't be where you are now without those rotations, without those preceptors and those teachers. You literally wouldn't be there. Not even getting to like mentors that you talk to and people who inspired you, but just you physically couldn't move on to the next step.
You were so right. And I tell you, you don't see all of those people who have the opportunity to train and educate approaching colleges of osteopathic medicine or MD schools or PA schools or pharmacy schools or wherever to say, I would like to set up a preceptorship and they can come to my office, they can come to my hospital, they can come to my surgical center. I don't think they really realize that's a possibility, and a one-off situation is hard to create.
Yep.
AMO is doing it on the other side of this equation too, and you've educated me on this very important point. They're coming to you because they know they can be educational sites, training sites.
Right.
And you're going to them, marketing to them, saying, would you like to do this with your practice? Would you like to have help? Would you like to train the nation's next healthcare providers? And, absolutely, would you like to create a pipeline even for your own institution?
Yeah.
There are 2 sides of the equation. AMO sits right in the middle of both of them, which uniquely positions you to really help both of them.
Right. I like to think of us like a matchmaker. I really do. Because to your point, not every clinical site has the same workforce
Well,
need.
it is AMO.com, right?
.org.
Well, we need to think about changing that then, based on what you said.
No, but we are a matchmaker. We because, one site might have a need for a certain type of learner and another site might, because and we'll get to this, but to me it goes back to that rural education of you create workforce pipeline early in teaching learners. But not all sites have the same needs. And not all schools have the same needs for different sites. There's certain things like pediatrics and OBGYN that come up frequently now because of many different things. But at the end of the day, if you talk to a dean who said, I'm not worried about my clinical sites in a year, I'd tell her, I don't believe you, because everyone should be concerned because it's always a need,
The dean that says they're not worried about clinical sites and clinical rotations are the ones that have retired.
Exactly.
It's an ongoing concern. And I'll tell you what, I've got to go back to this other point because when I learned this, it was fascinating to me. It's not easy to be a preceptor. It's not easy to host clinical rotations.
Right.
But doesn't AMO have all the resources to make it easier for them? How can you be a preceptor? And can you just kind of outline that? Because you make it easy. You don't make them create it, and you don't ask the school to create it. You create it.
Right, exactly. So, I love to go into teaching sites, places with teachers and say, hey, do you want to teach more? Because we can make it a very basic value proposition of these sites is, look, we'll make teaching really easy, because the part of clinical education that is a pain in the butt for both sides is the administration of it.
Right.
If you are sitting on your end, you've got a GME department, you've got people devoted to that because of ACGME requirements, right? But even then, to expand significantly, even if you had a bunch of different teachers saying, I want to teach, somebody's got to do the hard work of processing those learners, especially if they're coming in from multiple schools, right? Every new school is a new school. They have different requirements, different schedules, and so by the time they get to the last thing you're going to want, or your staff's going to want, is a bunch of new headaches to say, look, well, now I got to do this, now I got to do that, because like you said, everyone's doing a bunch of different things. And so that is where I think we excel, going into these sites and saying, look, we'll take care of that for you. We have a clinical platform. You can see every student that's ever come, gone, or will come, and that's great for recruitment too. But then we will deal with the HIPAA compliances.
Right.
We'll deal with the immunizations. And guess what? You can see that we've done it because it's right there on the internal site.
And what about housing?
Exactly. Well, we do housing, right? Or we will help this learner find out. Hey, why don't you tell me, or here in beautiful Ocala, like you tell me, Dr. Klauer, Kevin, where some great housing might be for students or somebody you know. And you say, this person's lived here. That's all we need. And if you don't even know that, we'll figure it out. And then we work with those learners and get them situated. And this is international learners. These are domestic learners. These are people who might be from the same state or from different parts of the country. We do it all. So the goal is when that learner walks into your office, she's ready to learn and you're ready to teach because you're not worrying about all that other stuff. And that's literally how it works. And,
right.
and so yeah. And our idea is we will create more capacity by then more people saying, well, I'll take more students because it's not a big deal.
Well,
right?
And I think AMO, from what I've learned from all of you, really functions without pride. You're proud of what you do, but you're not so proud of what you do that you have to be in the forefront of this relationship.
Right.
So every great medical school has electricity. It has water. It has all of the utilities that it needs to run properly. You know what? I think people need to consider this in the same way. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do all this work yourself. You don't go pump the well out there.
Right.
So why do you need to create all the rotations and reinvent the wheel on this?
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're abdicating your responsibility as an educator or an institution. Right. It's just that you can get a partner that's focused on this piece of it that can make you that much better of an educational system and better educators.
Yeah. And that's a great point because I think a big concern is loss of autonomy. Like, okay, well, I'm ceding my clinical education enterprise over to this company, and then where do we stand? But it's not like we are, like you said, we are in the background. We're like the glue that keeps it together.
Right.
And so you just tell us, okay, these are the places you're interested in, or you just look at what we've got, we'll take that, we'll take that. And you, even if it's an existing site, your school will have to affiliate with that site. There is a relationship that's being built. We just help to keep it together, right?
Right.
So that's a great point. You know this company as well, if not better than I do. So.
Well, I've learned about it because it was so intriguing and it solved a problem. No one else is doing this. I can't believe you've been doing this for over 10 years.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know a thing about it.
Right.
And then when I learned about it and when I transitioned away from the AOA, I wanted to learn even more. And then being involved with all of you to help support this solution has really, really been a wonderful opportunity.
Well,
It just doesn't exist out there. And I think that is why on occasion, the solution and the company is met with some degree of skepticism.
Right.
You can't get something for nothing. Well, maybe today you can.
Yeah.
Maybe today you can, because on the school side, you're getting the relationship and you can look at all of those rotations that have it available. You're only spending, as we talked about before, the existing dollars you would already spend to get rotations.
Right.
And, on the rotation side, they're paying those fees to support all of that build up and that ramp up and the infrastructure, which they're willing to do.
Right.
So the relationship works well for all three parties. And what I love, again, about AMO is it's not pride-based. Mm-hmm. I mean, you are running in the background and you're smiling while you watch it work for others.
No, and thank you for noticing that. I mean, the happiest that we got a FQHC just signed on recently, and the excitement around the medical directors and the head of nursing when they realized, wait a second, with our resources, which aren't many, it's an FQHC. They're doing a great job with what they've got, but to expand into clinical education, they've been limited. They said, wait a second, we can do this now. And once they realized, yes, you can, because your future partners are in the pipeline when you start to teach them, because the light bulb went on. And so to me, that's always been the most exciting thing. I was talking about rural education. Those students that I talked about who are still in those places in Oregon, I know the impact on those communities. I've been to them. It's massive. Yeah. And those people are happy to be there. And they're there not because they want to pay their loans off, but because they want to be part of that community. Right. And so that's why you host loans. Anyway, I'd love to talk to you a little more about, you talked a bit about the cost of this. So thinking about, your school and, and even we could flip to the other side too, but what are the costs associated when you really get into the idea of, hey, we're going to expand our clinical sites. We need to get a bunch more because we're going to get a new campus. DO
Right.
schools are consistently. And again, we were talking about DO schools a lot because of your background, but this applies to our
course.
PA school partners, nursing partners. It's really not about just one profession. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with the costs associated with that in terms of I'm going to expand widely.
Yeah, well, you can expand class size is one thing. You can apply to your accrediting agency to do that. You can also do a satellite campus, remote campus, and sometimes they get as large as the primary.
Right.
And you're still going to have to develop some of that infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you certainly can't consume the rotations you've already created.
Right.
With the new site or expansion of those additional spots.
Right.
So you've got to then create relationships. Sometimes there certainly is an exchange of dollars to make sure that if someone is paying, or let me word it this way, if you are consuming a spot for training and someone else doesn't get to have that, sometimes that is monetized and the school has to pay for that. The school has to pay for other infrastructure pieces as well. And this is all above board, of course, but there are real hard costs associated with expansion and there are real hard costs associated with making sure that you're being compliant with the accreditation standards, and there are hard costs associated with making sure that you're creating partnerships that allow your students to rotate places. It costs money to host a student. So who pays that? Does the hospital or the clinic or someone else just pay that out of the goodness of their heart? Generally, they work out a relationship with the institution so that it's covered.
Yeah.
Unless someone else steps in
Right.
and handles that.
Right. And to your point, so there are costs, and you're expanding, but so often I think because of the way that clinical education has been handled for so long, the thought of really having, outside of maybe some of your internet, some schools, but a lot of the domestic ones and ones that I've been a part of, don't really to expand rapidly. It's more than just going and getting sites. You've got to have people to make this happen. And oftentimes I found, on both sides actually, not just the school side, but the clinical side, and I'd love to hear if you agree with this, it doesn't necessarily proportionally expand when you have that. So a lot more gets thrown on
Right.
maybe a few more people. And because those are the kinds of jobs that those are hard dollars you got to spend now to fund a couple more coordinators, to fund
Right.
Another dean of clinical education, not replace the one, but maybe you need 2 or 3. That's
right.
That adds up.
Well, you can stress your system to try and handle a larger educational program without adding resources, and
Right.
you absolutely need to. And something that, again, you amazed me about this, you personally, that I didn't know that you provided consulting.
Oh yeah.
You personally have had so much experience in education. I think you and others have brought that to AMO, that if someone needs to know how to fill out forms, how to navigate through an expansion, how to do a satellite
Right.
campus, guess what? You know how to do it.
Right.
And you can help, again, not take that away from someone, but remove the burden.
Right.
Because no one is in this to be an expert at paperwork.
Right.
They want to make their program better.
Right.
But there is an organization out there called AMO that'll help you do that too. They'll take the paperwork
Yeah.
while you make sure your program's better and you're expanding it.
And to that, we don't take, and those people who are doing that work already, those are often the people who like us the most. They're the ones doing backflips when they're like, wait a second, there's a company that can come in here and help me find placements. And I'm talking now often the coordinator level, because usually you've got your clinical dean who's out there, but then you've often the work gets done often by those coordinators, as various different organizational ways to do it. But the people who are out there having to place the students, and so what we do is we make their lives a ton easier.
Right.
And it's also not just in a like you said. I'm learning from you and how you're reflecting back these things too. I always think of us, we are a trusted educational partner. Partners grow in a relationship. Often, we come in, people say, okay, well, you've got these clinical sites, and then you just want us to go and get the ones we want. We don't need these, but we want those. That's one way to look at it. That's kind of like the most immediate needs, and we can do that, right? But then even better, hey, tell us what you might need in 6 months or a year. Oh, or you're doing a class size expansion. Okay, in 2 years? Okay. And then to your point, consultative, certainly, maybe we can just help get, we can work with you in multiple ways. There's not just a one way we do it, because we're there to help you in whatever your goals are. So anyway.
Yeah, one-stop shopping, it makes sense. And you know what? There is healthy competition within undergraduate medical education and allied health professional education there really is. But you want to make sure you're competitive. And if you can make sure that your candidates and potential students know that you have these resources available to you, it makes you competitive. If someone else has it and you don't, it makes you non-competitive. And this resource is out there with no additional expense. I mean, the consulting, just like any consultant, if you want those extra services, those are a la carte, and you can select those. But the main relationship with rotations as an educational institution, you're not spending new dollars. You're already spending those already. You're just going to spend those through the rotations that you set up through the website and through the network that AMO has created.
And to that, you have me thinking to the we also things that we have that schools often struggle with, just process-wise, affiliation agreements. That's a huge thing. So that's a big barrier for any school to go to a new clinical site, and it's frankly it's a barrier for us too. It's tough because clinical systems are risk averse and to take on a new site. So one thing that it's worked well is when we work with our partner schools in our placements, we're really doing a lot of that work ahead of time. The schools are going to have to affiliate, but we're already priming the pump with these systems like, hey, we have a wonderful school here. They match what you're looking for, and they will need to affiliate. So when we basically hand off, it's a warm handoff when it goes to the school to do it, which is really tough to do because they're working uphill from that from the beginning.
And people can get good at doing affiliation agreements, but if you're only trying to do one or two, you can't develop a competency in it. And it's hard. But if that's what you're doing all the time to help others, then you know how to navigate through that, and you can avoid the obstacles that you've encountered previously, where others may not know that. So again, the path of least resistance.
I'm curious. So before we've kind of been on the schools a lot, and we'll stay here for a second, but it's kind of like a no-brainer. I don't know why if we're not coming to a school and saying you need to pay us a subscription fee to be part of our services, which we do not. We simply say we affiliate with you so you can see what we've got, and then we'll grow with you. Maybe you don't need these things right now, but maybe you need them in 6 months. We'll grow with you. Or, what is the resistance? Why wouldn't all schools not want to be working with a partner like this?
I don't know that it's resistance. I think it's perhaps a lack of perceived value. When someone feels like you're giving something away, it has the appearance of devaluing it. But if they fully understand the relationship and what you're offering, there is true value. You're not seeking that value, and you're not supporting the economics of your organization from the institution itself. It's on the other side. So if they understand that on the front end, it's like, oh, well, if you're just giving me something, it's not worth anything. No, it is worth something. But in providing this for you, it enhances the service that we provide. And it does not need to cost you anything. And knowing that it's being sensitive to the learner, being sensitive to the educational institution. Listen, if you can do this with the existing dollars you have budgeted already and not spend more, it works for you. And again, if there were multiple institutions or organizations out there doing this, and they could compare, say, which one do we like best? I don't want to go too far off on a tangent here, but this just came to mind. A great analogy. So what if there was no toilet paper? And you had to decide, well, why do I even need that? I mean, it's free when I go into a rest stop or whatever. But you have multiple brands, multiple options. Well, maybe there's value here. There are many people offering this service. Let me pick the best of those offering the service. Now, you and I know it's a quick sell. It's an easy sell to understand the value of toilet paper. A nice 2-ply tissue goes a long way, Ryan. I'm telling you what. Well, maybe we need to get there with undergraduate medical education and allied health professional education as well, that this is just as important. Maybe not quite as important as toilet paper.
No, nothing more important.
But nothing ever more important than that. But having a little fun with you, that really it's got to be just that important. But if you've never, the point I'm making is, if you've not been exposed to something and don't see the value and did okay without it before, even if it's really great and wonderfully valuable, you might not get it yet. And why wait for others to come out and do this? Because you're 10 years in. No one is going to do this. They're going to be trying to catch up. So there is no comparison out there except having nothing.
No, and that's a great point. And I'm very honored that you liken my career to toilet paper. But
I did not do that.
But, well, this part of my career. But
that one portion, yes.
Just this part. Just this
slice. The one ply.
One ply. Never single, though. But I think it's that... first of all, you say you're right. We've been around 10 years, but most of that time was in a very different space. So it started off as a way to bring in mainly international learners to help with the workforce shortages at the time, because primarily international learners were filling those. So get them over here for a respectable rotation, get a merit-based letter of recommendation, and then you can apply for the U.S. match, right? That's kind of what it was. And then prior to my tenure here, there was a realization, hey, their same needs are in the domestic space. And there's a lot of schools, especially those with distributed learning models, that could use the same level of service and have the same needs. And certainly when you look at a lot of these different professions we're working with are filling those, anybody's filling the workforce needs now, because it's huge. So that's where we transitioned to the domestic. And I think, though, because it's been newer, that's why it's a little bit fear of the unknown. I'll tell you, when I was in charge of that as an associate dean of med ed, I had no idea what this company was. I'd never heard of them. Boy, when I go back to that place when there was 4 days with the dean trying to find these places, I wish I knew about AMO, because they could have actually really helped us out of a pick. It wasn't a very seamless process for those students.
Right.
We could have had them placed potentially within hours if we knew AMO.
And you developed your competency outside of the purview of the people that you're offering this to now. Mm-hmm. So it still looks very new and fresh. It's not new and fresh.
Right.
It's just a new offering to them.
Right.
And so exposing them to it and making sure they know that there is not some catch, there's not some hidden fee, there's not some ulterior motive is really important. That's why I think there is some skepticism. We've talked a lot about the institutions, a little bit about the clinical sites. Who's the most important recipient of your services? The student. What's in it for them?
Right. So, I think that's the most important recipient of what the services are. Yes, we provide great administrative support for the schools, and as we'll talk about, the clinical sites. But when you think about the student and what they get in this, now I have worked my entire career with people devoted 100% of their passion and effort to making sure student rotations go as well as possible. But it is impossible to scale that at any medical school. I've been at big ones, smaller ones. It's the same story. There's a lot of people working really hard for a lot of students, and especially when you start building class size in. Now you start looking at you go back to the distributed model, right? So you've got students we talked about who are given a piece of paper sometimes and saying, good luck to you, and thank you very much for that $30,000 tuition, right? Mm-hmm. So what do they get in that? Well, they get a lot of stress, right? They get a lot of stress because now, where am I supposed to go? Where am I supposed to live? Will this preceptor take me? And if so, I guess I'm going to have to move again. And there's a lot there. So I found the worst thing that can happen for an educational experience, especially clinical, is when that learner comes in stressed. Now, they're going to be stressed. They're clinical students. But if they come in stressed because they don't know where the front door is, or if their badge isn't working, or they didn't get their compliance, so now they're out for 3 days because they can't rotate, that's really stressful, and that takes away from the entire experience. And frankly, it takes away from the perception of the quality of that clinical site, right? Who's maybe saying this person might be an all-star for me in a couple of years. So the best thing for the student and what happens is they just get the most white glove hands-on service that they could possibly get, better than anything I could have ever provided in all of my trying at OHSU or Neomed or AUC or any other place I might have ever worked. It's impossible because there's a million other things. All we do is that. There are people on my organization's teams that are focused solely on helping that learner have the best possible experience from the moment she says, I'm going, how am I going to get over there? What do I need to do? Where do you go eat in town from that point? And then on the flip side, to make sure that preceptor is ready for that learner. So the preceptor's like, who are you? I wasn't expecting you. That never happens when you've got so many people devoted to it. And that's why I really think we're a bandwidth extender. We're not taking the job of those people who are working hard. We're just making their jobs that much easier and able to provide a level of service, not for them, just them, but for those students.
So Ryan, walk me through it. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a student and I pick a rotation, I click on it, I'm ready to go.
Yep.
When do you step in and what do you do?
Yep. So in that part, my team has been mainly on the clinical side. So we've been really securing those. But I have colleagues who instantly engage with that learner. First of all, make sure, now say through a school, it's a little different because the school often they'll curate the ones that they want. We know that the student is qualified. But say it's a student that we don't know anything of. First, we got to make sure they're qualified. Maybe this site only wants fourth-year students. Well, we're not going to go send a third-year student to that site. So there's people on my team that make sure they're qualified. And once they are, and once everything's in place, the school says it's okay, or the learner agrees, then that flips over to another team that basically a visitor experience team that works through that with that learner from the moment she gets ready to go to the moment she arrives, and even while she's there, all the way through. So imagine having somebody devoted to you as a student and your experience for the entire process. I worked at one of the best clerkships I thought I've ever worked at OHSU's Family Medicine Department. A little biased, but we really put everything, and most do, but that department put a lot of resources into it. Even then, there's no way we could put that much into one learner, but we do. That's what AMO is here for. So now you think about that student who's got a great home base, who's working with them, making sure everything, and then somebody else who's there just in case, who can pick up the phone in a second.
Well, and the educational institution can't provide that. They may not know anything about the location where they're going to.
Right.
And the clinical site probably doesn't have the time or the bandwidth to do so. And then maybe they do, maybe they don't. But either way, they don't have to.
Right.
Because the student is getting concierge service from you.
There you go. Concierge service. That's the best way. Yeah, exactly. And so when they walk in the door, they're ready to learn, and the preceptor's ready to teach. And the administrators there aren't worried about a violation of some compliance.
You're making me almost want to go back to medical school.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm so
almost, Ryan.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that. So, speaking of medical schools, we've spoken a lot of medical schools, not medical schools, clinical schools, whatever. So I would like to transition over to the other side, because obviously for this endeavor we're in, which is clinical education, you have to have the learners in the schools, but then just as important, you have to have the sites, right?
Right.
So I would like to transition to that, and I won't maybe bring out the Kraken just for the transition.
If I must.
You must, yeah. The Kraken signifies a transition.
I think it really is, quite honestly. You forced me to do this. It's the tentacles of the offerings of AMO.
They're
endless.
They're endless, and they're squishy, and they stick to things. And
wow, that is more than enough.
Yeah,
I think.
put the Kraken away, please, and do not bring out a roll of toilet paper.
I won't.
There is none in this room, and if it was,
and there's no need.
No, there's no need. Not yet. Okay, so you are a chief medical officer at a major healthcare system here in Florida, and I would like to hear a little bit more about. Let's just talk about the thing I think that on everyone's mind is workforce.
Sure.
Talk about the biggest challenges you're facing and your colleagues around the country are facing in terms of workforce in general in healthcare.
Well, I mean, there are workforce needs, but I would take even one step back to say, what is our mission? Part of our mission is graduate medical education. We can also assist with undergraduate medical education. And by the way, what is a rotating student for us? Well, it's a commitment for us to make sure we provide them a quality training experience. But those are our future candidates for our GME program. So there's our pipeline. Rotations come in, people come in for those rotations. Those are great candidates for our GME programs, and people that graduate from our residency training programs or our fellowships are hopefully our next physicians who are going to be on our medical staff. We really, truly believe that. Now, others will go other places, and we've trained great people who end up all over the country, but we retain a lot. And if they train in our system, and we have the opportunity to really reflect the values that we have and how we'll take care of our people, they are oftentimes long-term committed.
Right.
So creating that pipeline makes a lot of sense, and it is absolutely intentional.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you have a great pipeline of students to show your great institution to, while they can learn and while they can also help provide some care and support to patient care, while we're providing great service for them so they get a great educational experience as a medical student or allied healthcare professional student.
Right. Because those candidates, so we don't just work with medical students have to go under residency. You have residency programs.
Yes.
Not all places do. And not all students you host are going to go to your residency. Although you talked about it's a wonderful way to kind of audition them and them to audition you, right? But the nice thing is we also work with nursing schools, physician assistant schools, and we're and we're always expanding. That's just
Right.
kind of where we're looking now, where we're mainly working. You can hire those people almost on the spot.
Right.
You could say, wow, that's a rock star PA. What are you doing in 6 months? Because we'd love to have you here. Have you ever done anything like that, or seen like someone come through in a clinical rotation?
Absolutely. And I tell you what, essential to the workforce are RNs, also advanced practice registered nurses, PAs, and others in healthcare. And as I mentioned earlier, team-based healthcare is absolutely the most successful strategy. And so we really, really value the contributions of everyone, and everyone has a little bit of a different role.
Yep.
So have we been able to do that? Yes. Can you, ignite the interest within your institution by someone who's rotating, who might have a shorter educational trajectory? Maybe it's not 4 years in medical school. Maybe it's 6 months left in a PA program,
right? And
maybe they're ready to come out afterwards. And so yes, those opportunities have certainly presented themselves, and we've certainly capitalized on them.
Right. And when I was in the academic dean role, I would often get questions from people like you or people who worked with you saying, "Hey, can you give us a list of everyone who's rotated here?" And what they were, I didn't really understand it as much at the time, but I do now. They were looking for really kind of ROI report, like, hey, okay, so this school sends us all these students. How many of these people have come back as residents, or even how many have come back to work for us? And if you asked me that question, it was honestly hard. It would be hard to do because we don't really, at least organizations that I worked with, and I probably argue most, don't necessarily have it as centralized. Some do, but oftentimes it's centralized even within departments. It's not like a central one school has all that database, right? So when I'm talking to institutions like this with AMO, I said, look, you want a recruitment pipeline. Everyone who's ever come through here from 10 years ago to now, you can look and see exactly who they are, and you can remember, and then you can have that, and we can even run reports for you. So you tell us how many have come back. We can give you statistics on that. So I really like to pitch us as a recruitment pipeline type of resource as well, not just getting learners, but intentionally getting them.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, yes, there's an altruistic reason to teach, but there's also a organizational need to teach for that pipeline you're talking about.
Absolutely, and it's not overly self-serving. I mean, you certainly are trying to educate and to train along the whole spectrum. And certainly you want, as you mentioned earlier, diversity of training sites, but also a diversity of your workforce and diversity of your students and your trainees.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that the people in your institution caring for patients represent the demographics of the patients in your community and your hospital.
Right.
And if you don't have an organization that can help you to create cast a broad net, let me word it that way, so a lot of people can apply for your rotations or see your site, then you miss a wonderful opportunity to have a lot of people potentially rotate at your institution.
Yep. And thanks for bringing up diversity, because that's a passion of mine, and it's a big reason that I'm passionate about the work I do here, because everyone would you say, as somebody in your position, now you're sitting in a different area, but would you agree that bringing in diverse workforce is a challenge for many, if not most, institutions?
It is, and I think people tend to feel most comfortable in environments that they are familiar with. And if you challenge yourself to be in a different place, and that's what's nice about a rotation, let me sample something, let me see if I feel comfortable, let me fit in. But you don't want to feel isolated. So to make sure that you've created an environment that is absolutely welcoming and inclusive is very, very important.
Right.
And also recognizing that the differences we see in others, and hopefully we see those differences enrich us as people. We learn from them. Yeah. When we really only focus on being around others that we're familiar with, that are just like us, we don't grow as people.
Right.
So you should welcome a diverse training experience. You should welcome a diverse workforce to make sure that we're always growing as people.
Right.
And as clinicians, we're always going to care for a large group of people and a very diverse group of people.
Right.
You want to make sure that you understand your patient population.
Right.
Even if you haven't walked a day in their shoes, you need to be very empathetic.
Right.
And having a lot of different rotations to choose from, a lot of different great places to go to is a wonderful way to make sure you get started out on the right foot.
Right. Great points. And I think about this too. So you're an institution that is one, I'll use a real world example. I was at a major healthcare organization on the East Coast, and I was at the hospital, and I was talking to a couple of their medical directors who dealt with a lot of the outpatient clinic. And I asked them, like, what percentage, and I knew the area had a lot of Spanish-speaking population. I said, what percentage of your patient population in your outpatient clinic is Spanish-speaking as a first language? Right? 90%. 90%.
Wow.
And then I said, well, how many of your providers are Spanish-speaking, whether it's first language or second language? 11% across the system. So
wow,
that's a big, and they were, and they weren't happy with this, but they said, their pipeline brings in, pipelines are called pipelines, they tend to keep going, and they struggle with bringing in enough applicants for those programs that speak Spanish natively or can't, and so what we're working with this organization and others on, say, you can tell us what you want in the sense of, hey, look, we've got capacity. We really need a more diversity of learners because of we aggregate multiple medical schools or clinical schools, right? We have schools, a wonderful partner, UAG, that has a big population. Their American population comes from Puerto Rico. And these are U.S. citizens looking for quality rotations from a wonderful school in Guadalajara. We can and they need to go to certain sites. We have the ability to say, look, you have a need here. We have learners here, and we can make that match that match in a way that organization wants it, but is struggling to find it because every year it keeps coming.
You're right.
Happening.
And pipelines are difficult to build.
Yeah.
They're great to have and they're worth building. But when you build one pipeline, it tends to give you similar results because you've constructed it in a certain way, either intentionally or unintentionally. What AMO does, from my estimation, is it creates multiple pipelines where you don't have to do that as an institution or a training site. You can absolutely make sure that you've got multiple avenues and you're available to many, many different learners.
Yeah. I like to think of it, I hate to say it, put the power back in the clinical sites with the rotations have all quote unquote power, but they have what everyone wants, which are clinical rotations.
Well, they have a wonderful resource to offer.
They do. Sure. And so why not, if you have this resource and you have institutional needs, whatever they may be intentional about the kinds of pipelines you're building. And if you can't internally do it because you want to bring in people from a different part of the country or the world or type of learner, then help us build that for you because we have those connections. It doesn't mean your old pipelines go out the door. It's just a new one. Right. So now you have and this actually, I'd be curious your thoughts on the new ACGME requirement around diversity. I was at the ACGME conference and heard that now there is a standard requirement, common standard, I think I'm saying that right, that every GME program has to be able to not only identify what their diversity goals are, but prove what they're doing about it.
Right.
Is that,
it has to be programmatically built and demonstrated.
Right.
And if you're not intentional about doing something, especially things that are difficult, things that are important and difficult, it just becomes a well-intentioned idea that doesn't get executed on.
Right.
So I think the common program standard is a good one.
Me too.
And it makes sense. And I'm hopeful that the programs really understand it and they really, really commit to it.
Yep. And what I tell the programs is we can help you with that. Yeah. Because if you're in a part of the country where that's very difficult to do or you don't have the staff, I mean, there's a lot of community-based programs. They're just kind of hanging on for dear life, Or your rural program, how do you meet that requirement? Well, talk to us. We will help you do that. We will bring in learners that meet whatever your diversity goals are because we have those partnerships. Okay, so Kevin, you are the chief medical officer of a robust, the biggest hospital system in the country, right? HCA. I think if you've looked at it all, you have graduate medical education programs. And you live in a relatively metropolitan area, desirable area to come to. So even then, I know there's struggles for recruitment and whatnot, but you've got infrastructure. You've got some basics because of being GME. Now, let's flip it over to I'd say the majority of clinical systems that can be hospitals, small clinics, physician groups that are not associated with GME. That it might not be in the most desirable, say they're a rural program or they're a community-based hospital. does not have a teaching culture as part of its, it could be a part of its mission, but not baked in as part of GME. They have recruitment problems, I'd imagine. So
of course they do.
Well, put on your chief medical officer hat. You might have even been at some of these places in some roles in your career, but what do they do about workforce?
Well, I mean, they use the traditional mechanisms to recruit and retain people. And that can be fine, but if you want to create an additional pipeline, we've talked so much about pipelines, you could certainly be an offsite or satellite clinical rotation, create relationships and bring people in. And you can have an affiliate relationship with an academic institution in a GME program, and you could absolutely create a new pipeline that's open to you. People who rotate through a place and like it, like the staff, like the community, they want to come back. They want to also take the path of least resistance in their life, most of us. And so absolutely this opens up an opportunity for them as well.
What would you say would be the biggest challenges? Say you're a community-based school, hospital, in an area that does not have any kind of academic affiliations. What are their biggest challenge in hosting learners?
Well, the biggest challenge in hosting learners on a non-academic site is hosting learners, Ryan. So that's the issue. I remember, you just reminded me, many years ago as an emergency department medical director, I wanted, having come from academics, wanted to bring in learners. And there was simply no infrastructure to do it. On the institutional side, they wanted to do that. So on the GME side, but there was just really no way to put it together at the institution. So now, many years later, here comes AMO. And AMO can provide the infrastructure and the policies and the framework of how you do that. Now maybe I go back there. And I could do that at this point at the institution. I kind of wanted to, but it was too heavy of a lift. And I think this is a great opportunity for those who want to have a smaller role in GME, or even having students come in UGME and really make sure that they are participating, creating a new pipeline, and really contributing to training and education. But without having to build a system that is just, it's incomprehensible of how difficult it would be.
In the resources, because again, we go back to those coordinators doing all that work. Well, it's the same thing on the academic side, or the hospital side, or the clinical side. I mean, even at ACGME hospitals, it often comes down to a few really devoted souls who are doing this work. But now you're a clinical system. Say what I often hear when I'm talking to clinical sites and systems is they say, we don't have the capacity to teach. And I dig down and say, really? You don't have any capacity to teach? Now, some don't. Some are really barely hanging on, and my heart goes out to them because they're in a tough spot. But some of them have a lot of docs walking around and nurses walking around, physician assistants walking around, but they don't have, it's not that they don't have the teaching capacity, they don't have the administrative capacity. Or they might have the one school, and they're like, that's enough. Because I get another school, that's another set of affiliations, it's another set of HIPAA compliant schedules. I ain't going to do it.
It's a mindset. If you are not committed to doing it, or you think it's too difficult, you might say it's a capacity issue. No, it's not, because there's got to be an appropriate trade-off for service, for education. So you're going to educate, but there will be service that people provide through that education. They're going to have to provide service to patients and service to the institution to learn their trade. And you benefit from that. As long as that dynamic and that relationship is equally matched, then it's a wonderfully symbiotic relationship to have.
We're like a third-party office of medical education, what I tell them. Like, you don't have to go hire all these people that you already don't have. Like, you have trouble recruiting regardless as staff. Use us to help you, to bring you learners. Because I guarantee you, because we're working with all kinds of schools, and there are many different schools that would happily send learners out to a rural area, especially if they can get several different core rotations. And all of those learners have those experiences at those sites that may say, I want to go back there.
And it's not hypothetical. It's happening right now. You are actually doing this. And it's pretty exciting.
It is. It's the reason I get up in the morning to go to work. I really is, because of going back to that rural training I did. It's just, I'm so passionate about it, and and we have the infrastructure to do it. But we get back to that idea of things that are new and difficult. And the thing too is these sites will say, okay, what's it going to cost me? I said, it's not going to cost you anything actually, because the way our model works is not based on the clinical sites ever paying anything. You are providing your time and your resources. We will make it easy for you to host these learners, and hopefully you can get those back in terms of your workforce. So anyway.
You said this is why you get up in the morning to do this work, and you've been getting up in the morning to really help learners for a long, long time. And I will tell you, each and every one of us has 24 hours in a day, and we get to pick and choose what we're going to spend our time with. I was so excited to have this opportunity to work with you and others at AMO because it's providing a resource that nobody else is providing. And it's doing it in a way that is cost effective, and it's making sure that you're creating many solutions for many problems in undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education and the workforce. Where can you spend your time? Where it is selfless work, it's not costing new dollars, you're redeploying the same dollars, and you're making a really important system better tomorrow than it was yesterday.
Yeah.
For me, it was AMO.
Well, thank you. We couldn't be luckier and more honored to have you. It means a lot, I know, to our founders and to our entire organization that you've chosen to put your reputation in good hands with us, hopefully, because there's a lot of different things you could do with your time. So it's really touching and moving for me to hear you feel that passionate, because I feel it too. I could still be in academic medicine, but I belong here, and I'm glad you're here too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.